She gave shelter to a shivering brave. Now her house is guarded by Apaches warriors. The wind howled across the high desert of Arizona, carrying with it the sharp bite of an early winter storm that had caught everyone off guard. Elena. Martinez pulled her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders as she checked the windows of her small adobe house one more time. The weather report had called for light snow, but what was happening outside looked more like a blizzard. Elena had lived in this remote area outside Flagstaff for 15 years, ever since her husband Miguel had died in a construction accident. She'd chosen isolation over the pity of well-meaning neighbors, finding solace in the vast landscapes and the rhythm of desert life. Her nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and she preferred it that way. The power had gone out an hour ago, and the temperature was dropping fast. She lit another oil lamp and added more wood to the old cast-iron stove that heated her kitchen. The radio, running on batteries, crackled with emergency warnings about the unprecedented storm system that had stalled over northern Arizona. It was then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the creaking of her house, a soft thudding against her back door, irregular and weak. Elena froze, listening. Living alone had made her cautious, but something about the sound seemed desperate rather than threatening. She grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen counter and approached the door carefully. "Who's there?" she called out in English, then repeated it in Spanish. No answer came, just another weak thump against the wood. Elena's heart raced as she turned the deadbolt and cracked the door open. The beam of her flashlight revealed a young man collapsed against her doorframe, his dark hair matted with snow, his lips blue with cold. He was Native American, probably in his 20s, wearing jeans and a thin denim jacket that offered no protection against the brutal weather. "Dios mío," she whispered, immediately pulling the door wide. The young man's eyes fluttered open briefly, unfocused and glazed with hypothermia. Without hesitation, Elena grabbed him under the arms and dragged him inside, surprised by her own strength fueled by adrenaline. She managed to get him to the couch near the stove, where she quickly began removing his wet clothes. His skin was dangerously cold, and she could see he was in the advanced stages of hypothermia. Years of living in harsh conditions had taught her the signs. Elena worked efficiently, wrapping him in every blanket she owned and positioning him close to the stove's warmth. She heated water and made sweet tea, managing to get small sips past his chattering teeth. For hours, she monitored his breathing, his pulse, talking to him softly in both English and Spanish, urging him to stay with her. As dawn broke, the storm began to subside, and the young man's condition stabilized. His eyes opened clearly for the first time, dark and intelligent, studying her face with an intensity that made her step back slightly. "Thank you," he said in perfect English, his voice hoarse but strong. "You saved my life." Elena nodded suddenly, aware of how intimate the situation had become. This stranger in her home, dependent on her care. "What's your name? What were you doing out there?" He hesitated before answering. "I'm David Nalnish. I was traveling. My truck broke down about 2 miles from here. I tried to walk for help when the storm hit." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm Apache from the San Carlos Reservation." Something in the way he said it made Elena realize this wasn't the whole story, but she didn't press. Instead, she brought him more tea and a bowl of soup she'd warmed. "I'm Elena Martinez. This is my home." She gestured around the simple but comfortable space. "You can stay until you're strong enough to travel." David nodded gratefully, but there was something in his expression, a weight, a worry that went beyond his brush with death. As he sipped the soup, Elena noticed his hands were calloused and strong, and there was a small tattoo on his wrist that looked like traditional Apache symbols. Outside, the world was buried in white silence, but Elena had the strangest feeling that the storm had brought more than just snow to her doorstep. She had acted on instinct, on the simple human impulse to help someone in need, but something told her that this decision would change everything. As David recovered his strength by the fire, Elena began to understand that some storms don't just change the weather, they change the course of people's lives entirely. 3 days passed before the roads were clear enough for travel, and in that time, Elena learned that David Nalnish was not just any Apache man seeking shelter. As his strength returned and his natural wariness gave way to gratitude, pieces of his story began to emerge. "My grandmother is sick," he told her on the second evening as they sat by the fire sharing Elena's simple dinner of beans and cornbread. "Very sick. The doctors at the Indian Health Service say there's nothing more they can do, but she's been asking for traditional medicine. Plants that only grow in certain places in these mountains." Elena understood immediately. She'd lived long enough in Arizona to know about the tension between modern medicine and traditional healing, especially in native communities where access to healthcare was often limited and trust was hard-earned. "That's why you were out there in the storm," she said. "It wasn't a question," David nodded. "The medicine woman on our reservation gave me specific instructions about where to find what I needed. But I had to go at the right time when the plants would be most potent. I couldn't wait for better weather." He showed her a small leather pouch he carried, partially filled with various roots and leaves he'd managed to gather before the storm hit. "I almost had everything she needs. There's just one more plant. It grows near the old mining caves about 10 miles north of here." Elena knew the area he was talking about. It was treacherous terrain even in good weather, full of abandoned mine shafts and unstable ground. "You can't go back out there alone," she said firmly. "Not until you're completely recovered." "I have to," David replied, his voice quiet but determined. "She's all the family I have left. She raised me after my parents died. She's 93 years old and she's been fighting this illness for months. The traditional healing is her choice, her way of facing what's coming." Elena saw the pain in his eyes, the weight of responsibility he carried. It reminded her of the helplessness she'd felt when Miguel was dying, the desperate desire to do something, anything, to help the person you love most. "Tell me about her," Elena said softly. David's face softened as he spoke about his grandmother, Clara Nalnish, known in their community as a wisdom keeper and storyteller. She had taught him Apache traditions, language, and the old ways of living in harmony with the land. She had also encouraged his education, supporting him through college where he'd studied environmental science. "She always said I had one foot in the old world and one in the new," David explained. "She wanted me to be a bridge between them. Now she's asking me to honor the old ways for her final journey." Elena felt a deep respect for this young man and his mission. She thought of her own grandmother, who had crossed from Mexico with nothing but fierce determination and love for her family. Family loyalty, she understood, was not negotiable. The next morning, Elena made a decision that surprised even herself. "I'm going with you," she announced as David prepared to leave. "Elena, no, it's too dangerous and this isn't your responsibility." "Maybe not," she said, loading supplies into her old Ford pickup truck. "But I know these mountains better than anyone. I've been exploring them for 15 years. And besides," she added with a slight smile, "you saved my life too." "How did I save your life?" Elena paused, realizing she'd never articulated this feeling before. "I've been living like a ghost for years, just going through the motions. When you knocked on my door when I had to help someone, I remembered what it felt like to be truly alive, to matter to another human being." David studied her face, seeing the loneliness she usually kept hidden. "Your husband?" 15 years ago. I shut everyone out after that. But these few days, taking care of you, having someone to talk to, I remembered who I used to be." They drove north together, Elena's truck handling the rough mountain roads with familiar ease. She guided David to areas where the medicinal plants grew wild, using knowledge she'd gained from years of hiking and her own interest in desert botany. As they searched together, David shared more about Apache traditions and his grandmother's stories. Elena told him about her life in Mexico before coming to Arizona, about Miguel and their dreams of a family that never came. When they finally found the last plant David needed, growing in a hidden canyon near the old mining claims, Elena felt a sense of completion she hadn't experienced in years. They were no longer just two strangers thrown together by chance. They had become allies in something meaningful. But as they prepared to return to David's reservation, neither of them realized that their mountain expedition had been observed. Ancient eyes had watched from the ridges above, and word was already spreading through networks older than any modern communication system. The Apache people had their own ways of honoring those who honored them, and Elena Martinez had just earned a recognition she didn't yet understand. The San Carlos Apache Reservation stretched across nearly 2 million acres of diverse terrain, from desert lowlands to mountain forests. As Elena's truck wound through the reservation roads, she felt the weight of entering a world that was both part of Arizona and completely separate from it. David directed her to a modest cluster of homes where his grandmother lived with various extended family members. The houses were a mix of traditional and modern, some adobe and wooden structures alongside newer HUD housing, satellite dishes next to traditional ramadas where families gathered in the shade. Elena parked but hesitated to get out of the truck. "Maybe I should wait here," she said, suddenly aware that she was an outsider in this community. "Please," David said. "She'll want to meet you. She'll want to thank you." Clara Nalnish was tiny but formidable, her silver hair braided long down, her back, her dark eyes sharp despite her illness. She sat propped up in bed, surrounded by family members who had gathered from across the reservation. When David entered with the medicine plants, a murmur of relief and approval rippled through the room. David spoke to his grandmother in Apache, explaining what had happened, gesturing toward Elena, who stood uncertainly in the doorway. Clara's eyes found Elena's face, and she beckoned her forward with a surprisingly strong gesture. "Come," Clara said in accented English. "Sit with me." Elena approached the bed, accepting the chair that was immediately provided. Clara took her hands in her own, studying Elena's face with an intensity that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "David tells me you saved his life in the storm," Clara said. "But more than that, he says you helped him complete his mission for me. You honored our ways even though they are not your ways." "I just did what anyone would do," Elena replied, uncomfortable with the attention from the room full of people. Clara smiled, the expression full of wisdom and gentle amusement. "No, child, not anyone. Many people would have turned away. Many people would have been afraid or would have tried to talk him out of traditional medicine. You saw what was in his heart, and you helped him honor it." Over the next hour, Elena watched as Clara's daughter and granddaughters prepared the traditional medicine under the guidance of an elderly medicine woman who had traveled from another part of the reservation. The process was ceremonial, accompanied by prayers and songs in Apache that Elena didn't understand but found deeply moving. David sat beside his grandmother, translating some of the conversation for Elena, helping her understand the significance of what was happening. This wasn't just about medicine. It was about continuity, about keeping alive traditions that connected the Apache people to thousands of years of wisdom and survival. "My grandmother says you have a good heart," David told Elena as the ceremony continued. "She says the spirits led me to your door for a reason." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. In this room full of family love and ancient traditions, her own loneliness felt both more acute and somehow less permanent. These people had welcomed her not because she belonged to their world, but because she had chosen to act with kindness when it mattered. As evening approached, Clara insisted that Elena stay for dinner. The extended family had prepared a feast: fry bread, beef stew, roasted corn, and other traditional foods. Elena found herself seated at a place of honor, included in conversations, asked about her own life and family. "My grandmother wants to know about your people," David translated during the meal. "She says everyone belongs to a people, and she wants to understand yours." Elena spoke about her family in Sonora, about the Mexican traditions she'd grown up with, about her journey to Arizona and the life she'd built there. She was surprised to find how much the two cultures had in common: strong family ties, respect for elders, connection to the land. As the evening wound down, Clara called Elena to her bedside once more. Speaking in Apache, she gave David detailed instructions that made him look surprised and somewhat concerned. "What is she saying?" Elena asked. David hesitated. "She's giving me instructions about protecting you. She says you've honored our family, and now our family has a responsibility to honor you in return." "That's not necessary," Elena protested. "I don't need protection." Clara spoke again, more firmly this time, and several of the younger men in the room nodded with serious expressions. "She says it's not about what you need," David translated. "It's about what's right. In Apache tradition, when someone risks themselves to help our people, they become part of our protective circle. She's asking some of my cousins to watch over you." Elena was both touched and alarmed. "David, I can't accept that. I live alone by choice. I don't want to be a burden on your family." But Clara was already giving more instructions, and Elena could see that this was not up for debate. In this culture, certain obligations were sacred, and Elena's act of kindness had triggered something that went far deeper than simple gratitude. As Elena prepared to drive home that night, David walked her to her truck. "I'm sorry if this makes you uncomfortable," he said, "but you have to understand. What you did for me, for our family, it means something in our world. My grandmother is one of the most respected elders on the reservation. When she says you deserve protection, people listen." Elena looked back at the house, where she could see family members still gathered around Clara's bedside. For the first time in 15 years, she felt like she belonged to something larger than her own grief. "Will I see you again?" she asked. "David," he smiled, "you'll see more of me than you might want. I'm one of the cousins she assigned to watch over you." As Elena drove home through the desert night, she couldn't shake the feeling that her life had just taken another dramatic turn. She had given shelter to a stranger in a storm, and somehow that simple act of compassion had woven her into a family, a tradition, a responsibility that she was only beginning to understand. Elena first noticed them on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks after her visit to the reservation. She was hanging laundry on the line behind her house when a flash of movement caught her eye on the ridge about half a mile away. When she looked directly, there was nothing there, but she had the distinct feeling of being observed. By Thursday, she was certain. Someone was watching her house. At first, it made her nervous. Living alone had taught her to be alert to anything unusual, and the awareness of unseen eyes felt intrusive. But as days passed without any sign of threat or approach, Elena began to understand that these watchers were likely David's family members, fulfilling Clara's instructions. David himself appeared on Friday evening, arriving just as Elena was preparing dinner. She invited him in, grateful for the company and curious about what had been happening. "My cousins say you've been aware of them," he said with an amused smile as he accepted a cup of coffee. "It's hard not to be. I've lived alone for 15 years. I notice when that changes." Elena studied his face. "How is your grandmother?" David's expression grew more serious. "She's peaceful. The traditional medicine helped with her symptoms, but we all know she's preparing for her journey to the spirit world. She's been spending her time making sure all the family obligations are properly arranged, including the obligation to protect me, especially that." David leaned forward. "Elena, I need you to understand something. In Apache culture, what you did isn't just a good deed that gets forgotten. You risked yourself for one of ours. You helped complete a sacred mission for one of our most revered elders. That creates a bond that doesn't just disappear." Elena felt the weight of this responsibility. "I never asked for this, David. I just did what felt right." "I know, that's exactly why you deserve it." Over the following weeks, Elena began to notice the subtle signs of her protectors. Sometimes it was just a sense of presence when she hiked the trails near her house. Other times, she'd find evidence that someone had been nearby, footprints near her water well, or the way her garbage cans were positioned differently after collection day, as if someone had checked to make sure nothing seemed amiss. The watching felt less intrusive as time went on and more like family. She found herself leaving extra coffee in the pot some mornings, or occasionally setting out food that disappeared overnight. It reminded her of feeding stray cats. except these strays were Apache warriors ensuring her safety. One evening in late November, Elena's truck broke down on her way back from town. She just pulled over to assess the steaming engine when two young Apache men emerged from the brush alongside the road, as if they'd materialized from the desert itself. "Ma'am," one of them said politely, "we saw you having trouble. We're David's cousins, Marcus and Joseph. We can give you a ride home and get your truck towed." Elena recognized the family resemblance immediately. Both men had David's strong features and intelligent eyes, though Marcus was taller and Joseph had intricate traditional tattoos on his forearms. "You've been watching me," Elena said. It wasn't an accusation, just an acknowledgement. Marcus smiled. "Yes, ma'am. Our grandmother asked us to make sure you're safe. She said you're family now." As they drove Elena home in their truck, she learned more about her protectors. Marcus worked as a paramedic on the reservation and had military training from his time in the army. Joseph was a tribal police officer and expert tracker. Both men took their grandmother's instructions very seriously. "She's not just our grandmother," Joseph explained as they pulled up to Elena's house. "She's a clan mother, a keeper of traditions. When she speaks, it's not just her voice. It's the voice of our ancestors. What she told us about protecting you, that's as binding as any law." That weekend, David visited Elena with news that changed everything. "My grandmother passed away yesterday morning," he said quietly. Peacefully, surrounded by family, her last words were instructions about you. Elena felt genuine grief at the loss of Clara, despite having known her for only a short time. The elderly woman had possessed a presence that transcended the brief nature of their acquaintance. What were her instructions? David looked uncomfortable. "She said that your protection should continue indefinitely. She said you were meant to be part of our family, and that the spirits had brought us together for a purpose that isn't finished yet." "David, I can't ask your family to." "You're not asking," he interrupted gently. "And it's not negotiable. My grandmother's word on family matters is final, even after her death, especially after her death." The funeral was held a week later, and Elena attended despite feeling like an outsider at such an intimate family moment. But Clara's family insisted she be there, treating her as one of their own. Elena found herself in the front section with other family members, participating in ceremonies that honored not just Clara's life, but the continuity of Apache culture itself. After the burial, Marcus approached Elena with a proposition that surprised her. "Some of us have been talking," he said. "The watching, the protection, it's going to continue because that's what our grandmother wanted. But maybe there's a way to make it less one-sided." "What do you mean?" "You're a teacher, right? You taught high school before you retired, Elena?" Nodded. She'd taught history and English for 30 years before Miguel's death changed everything. "The reservation school is struggling. We need someone to help with tutoring, especially kids who are falling behind in English and history. Someone who understands that education doesn't have to mean abandoning culture." Marcus paused. "It would give you a reason to be part of our community, instead of just someone we watch over." Elena realized that Clara had been right about the spirits having a plan. Her lonely exile was coming to an end, but not in a way she could have ever imagined. She was being invited not just into safety, but into purpose. "When do I start?" she asked. 6 months later, Elena's house had become a gathering place she never could have imagined during her years of solitude. 3 afternoons a week, Apache. Teenagers arrived for tutoring sessions that had evolved far beyond simple homework help. Her kitchen table was perpetually surrounded by young people working through English essays, history projects, and college applications, while Elena moved between them offering guidance, encouragement, and homemade snacks. "Miss Elena," said Sarah, a 16-year-old junior who was working on her college application essays, "can you help me figure out how to write about growing up on the reservation without making it sound like a sob story?" Elena sat down beside her, recognizing the challenge that many of her students faced: how to honor their heritage while also demonstrating their readiness for the broader world. "Tell me about something specific that happened here that taught You something important, she said. Start with a story, not a statement. As Sarah worked on her essay, Elena reflected on how much her own life had changed. The teaching felt natural, like returning to a part of herself she'd forgotten existed. But more than that, she'd found herself becoming genuinely integrated into the Apache community in ways that went far beyond the original protective arrangement. David had become a regular presence in her life, their friendship deepening into something that neither of them had explicitly acknowledged but both clearly valued. He still lived on the reservation but spent many evenings at Elena's house, sometimes helping with tutoring, sometimes just sharing quiet conversation after the students had gone home. My grandmother would be pleased, he said one evening as they watched the sunset from Elena's front porch. The ever-present watchers were still there. Elena had learned to spot Marcus on the northern ridge and Joseph near the old mining road, but their presence had become comforting rather than intrusive. Do you think she planned all this? Elena asked. David smiled. I think she saw something that we couldn't see yet. She always said that healing comes in circles. You help someone, they help someone else, and eventually the help comes back to you in a way you never expected. Elena understood what he meant. The teenagers she tutored had become her connection to hope and future. Sarah had been accepted to Arizona State University with a full scholarship. Tommy, who'd been failing English, had discovered a talent for creative writing and was now editor of the school newspaper. Maria was planning to become a teacher herself, inspired by Elena's example. But the healing circle had expanded beyond just Elena and the students. Word had spread throughout the reservation about the Mexican woman who honored Apache traditions and helped their children succeed academically. Other families had begun reaching out, asking for help with everything from navigating college financial aid to understanding legal documents. Elena found herself becoming an unofficial liaison between the reservation and the outside world, using her bilingual skills and cultural understanding to bridge gaps. There's something I need to tell you, David said one evening as they sat by Elena's fireplace. The autumn air was crisp, reminiscent of that first night when he'd arrived half-frozen at her door. Elena looked up from the college recommendation letter she was writing for one of her students. What is it? The tribal council has been discussing something. They want to offer you an honorary place in our community, not just as a friend or helper, but as a recognized member of our extended family. David paused, studying her face. It's unprecedented for someone who isn't Apache by blood. But what you've done for our children, the way you've honored our grandmother's memory, they believe it deserves formal recognition. Elena felt overwhelming emotion at this unexpected honor. What would that mean? It would mean you'd have a voice in decisions that affect the community. It would mean your protection wouldn't just be about individual family obligation. It would be official, permanent. It would mean you'd truly belong somewhere again. The word belong hit Elena with unexpected force. She realized that for the first time since Miguel's death, she could imagine a future that wasn't just about surviving alone. There's something else, David continued, his voice softer now. The council meeting is next month, but I didn't want to wait to tell you how I feel about all this. About you. Elena set down her pen, giving him her full attention. When I knocked on your door that night, I was dying, David said. You saved my life, but it was more than that. You saw who I was, what mattered to me, and you chose to help me honor it. You didn't try to change me or convince me to abandon traditional medicine for modern treatment. You just supported what was important to me. Elena felt her heart racing. David, I know this is complicated. I know we come from different worlds, different ages, different experiences, but I also know that some connections transcend all of that. He reached for her hands. I love you, Elena. Not just for what you did for my grandmother, not just for what you've done for our community. I love who you are, your strength, your compassion, your willingness to let your life be changed by caring about other people. Elena looked into his eyes and saw not just affection, but a future she had never dared to imagine. A partnership built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and genuine love. I love you too, she said simply. Outside, the desert wind carried the scent of sage and the distant sound of coyotes calling to each other across the vast landscape. On the ridges surrounding Elena's house, her Apache protectors maintained their watch, but now they were guarding something more precious than just one woman's safety. They were protecting a love story that had grown from a moment of simple human kindness into something that would strengthen both their communities for generations to come. As David and Elena embraced by the firelight, both of them understood that some storms bring destruction, but others bring exactly what we need, even when we didn't know we needed it. The shivering brave who had knocked on Elena's door had brought with him not just a request for shelter, but an invitation to a life she could never have imagined, one filled with purpose, protection, and profound love. The circle was complete, but like all true circles, it was also just beginning.